In this video, I continue on with my little planets database, which just has the one table which lists the 9 planets. I'm including Pluto. And this time around, I'm going to show some variations on the queries. And it's just one table, so it's just a matter of, do I just do a sort of a select star, or am I naming the fields? And different types come out. So we have to pay attention to, are we getting objects? Are we getting dictionaries? Are we getting tuples, name tuples? What are we getting out of these queries? And then I will also sort of use some of those query results in our revise one of the data tables based on that change in query, and then add at the end an API. So I'm going to add another route that doesn't go to an HTML page, but just dumps out some JSON. Okay, so here we go. So I have the define and I have the load. I sort of kill the database, so let me reload the data. Now I have planet.db, I have the data. And so I'm going to just look at a bunch of queries. Okay, so my first query, again, I'm bringing in my definition. I'm bringing in SQLAlchemy and setting up a session. I have my planet database, and it has my 9 planets in it. So I'm just doing a basic query planet, and then I'm just saying, what do I have, and printing it out. Let me do a couple of clears, clear my path down here. And this first one is just I'm calling it the raw results. Just do the query, spit out it's some list of something. What are the somethings? It's going to prove, I think, to be objects. Then I'm going to do the same query and loop, but I'm going to do this sort of dunder dict, the underscore dict. And so I'm going to turn those objects into dictionaries. And so when at first it's an object, then, when you print it out, you're just going to get some like memory location or something not very useful. Down here, I'm taking an object and I'm going to say casting it down to a dictionary. So it's going to give me the name of the field and the value. And when I do just a generic query like this, again, I'm working with SQLAlchemy. So I get my fields and I put in my definition, I have an ID, a name, a distance, and a period. But I am going to get as well a field which belongs to SQLAlchemy. So we'll see that. So that will be, so let's, I'll do a lot of scrolling up, down. Let's look at that so far. Raw results should be objects, and then cast those objects as a dictionary. Let's see that. So that's more at the top. So let's get up to the top. And here's what I call the raw results. And so it's just not very useful. It's some planet object at some memory location or something. So not terribly useful. Now here I have them cast as dictionaries. And so here's Mercury. So we have this SQLAlchemy instant state, this sort of complicated thing. And then we have the actual properties of interest to us: distance and ID and name and period. So these are dictionaries because we made them dictionaries. We cast it as dictionaries. So raw results was objects. Cast as dictionary was, of course, dictionaries. Now I'm going to do the generic query, but use just sort of print it out with explicit names. So I'm saying the ID and the name and the period. So that's not a difference in the query. That's a difference in what I'm printing out. So I'm not casting it as a dictionary. I'm using it more of its object, but the object has access to the properties. So that should be the next one down the list. So that is here. And so I'm using them in their raw form, but not printing out the whole thing, but pulling out the properties of it. Okay. So that wasn't a change in the query. That was just a change in how I printed out the query results. Okay, this next one, I'm changing the query. So instead of saying query and just the whole planet, I'm saying query the planet name and the planet distance. So I'm only getting two of the properties. So up here, I'm sort of thinking of it as SQLAlchemy's version of select star. I'm getting all of the fields in the table. Whereas down here, I'm explicitly asking, I want name and distance only. But more is going to happen than that. So we're going to loop through the results and see what they look like. So again, I'm doing a query. I'm explicitly naming two columns, two properties that I want. I'm getting all of the queries. I'm looping through them. And I'm saying, what does a generic item, what is, I get a list of somethings. What's the something? Then I'm going to sort of say, I want the distance so I can access this as a property. Or I have two things. I can access it in an index fashion with an index of 0. So that should give me the name. And then I'm going to cast it as a dictionary. But I'm using a different type of cast. Up here, it was dunder dict, underscore, underscore, dict, underscore, underscore. And over here, it's underscore as dict, open, close parenthesis. So this is because we're going to see we're moving in sort of a different direction. So here's the query, the selected fields from the planet table. And so, and I looped through all my planets, but I printed out just the item. And when I printed out the item, I see a tuple, the Mercury and the distance. And then I can access an individual property just by saying dot distance. There it is. Or I can access a property by giving its index in this order. So the 0th property was the name, and there's Mercury. And then I can, but we see here that when we accessed it, when we looked at it as a tuple, it just seemed to be two things, but we can access it by the property name. So hidden in that tuple are names. So it's really sort of a named tuple. There's a little more structure than just what's showing here, because it does understand that this property is called distance and this property is called name. So it's a named tuple, not just a pure tuple. Not just a pure tuple value, but it's a sort of a name tuple. And then I turned that named tuple into a dictionary. And so before, when I made a dictionary, I was coming sort of, I don't know, I'll say down from an object, but now I'm getting a dictionary. I'm coming up from a named tuple. And so that's this, what I get in the end is pretty much the same. I get a dictionary, but it's coming sort of from a different direction. So that's why the difference in notation here. And then I go through all the planets. So there's a big long list, all of the 9. Okay. And now just reminding you that we can filter. So I can ask when I can combine all these things. I want specific properties, the name and the distance, and I want the distance to be greater than 10. So this is my more distance planets. And so let's see that. there are all my planets. Now here are just my more distant planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So that was here just with the filter, which sort of acts like a where in SQL. And I think we've shown a where previously, but when we were doing the whole table. So we can combine these. So the where, the filter, which is the equivalent of where, and naming our properties, those are not independent things. We can sort of put them all together, or they are independent things. We can sort of have them all. And then another thing you can do in SQL is you can rename. So you can have in your SQL statement, you can rename from the name that it's given in the database and give it a new name in your query results. And we can do that with SQLAlchemy as well. So we're taking the planet's name, and then I'm labeling it as planet name, planet underscore name. And down here, I'm taking the distance and saying, oh, well, we're going around sort of in a circle, so I'm calling it the radius. They're ellipses. I know, blah, blah, leave me alone. And but here, our point here is that we can rename the fields. And so that was then down here. So we got, I'm doing the, again, I can do the access the property, or I can cast it. And again, I'm casting it when I put in the explicit names of the things I want, I'm getting a named tuple. And so then when I want a dictionary, I'm going to use the terminal, I'm going to say I'm casting up, as opposed to when I had the object and I was casting down. Okay, and now that's my playing around with the queries, and specifically, am I naming the fields? Am I doing select star, or am I naming fields? I'm getting different things out of the query when I do that. Now let's move over to the routes. And I connect to my definitions, and I connect to my session, and I query my database. And I am taking that overall query result here and using a list comprehension to cast them all as dictionaries. And this was the whole table. So these were my items in my list were objects. And so I'm using the dunder dict to get dictionaries. Whereas I have a second query, and this time I'm naming the fields. And now I'm doing a different list comprehension where I'm using as dict. So I'm going from tuples up to dictionaries, whereas up here, from objects down to dictionaries. Okay, my default route is redirected to the planet table. Planet table is just the pure HTML table. There it is, okay. My second route is a data table, which is going to the jQuery, a data table which uses the jQuery library. Then I went more modern, and I went to a route that uses GridJS. And so up here, I was sending it this dictionary result, whereas the GridJS, it wants the data in a particular format. It wants a list of column names and then a list of lists of values. And so this was setting that up. And I did the result dict2, which was the second query, the query with the name fields. So one thing I was doing in some of those tables and data tables was just allowing whatever fields came in to sort of loop over the key value, the keys and the values, and just whatever came out, came out. But then there was that weird SQLAlchemy property then I had to pull out. Whereas here with query 2, I'm explicitly saying what I want. So I'm still going to do the discovery on the other side, but my query is more controlled here. And I'm saying I want ID and name and distance and period. And I'm going to get them in that order as well. So I'm controlling what I get and the order of what I get. And that's what I'm sending over to the GridJS now. And so I have commented out before, when I did the more generalized query of just select star, I was picking up the SQLAlchemy stuff. Now that I am naming my properties, I don't, I don't end up with this property because I didn't ask for it. So I had to remove it both from my columns and from my sort of set of values. But now that I've switched my query, I don't have to do that. So I have my query where I name my fields, I get tuples, I cast them up as dictionaries because I'm more used to dictionaries. And but I didn't have, because I didn't do the select star, I didn't pick up the SQLAlchemy field column that I didn't want. Then I was removing, and now I don't have to remove it because I don't have it. Okay. And then I send it over to GridJS. I did change one thing in my GridJS, just a silly little thing. I added a search true. So I've talked about this before, and let me cast it, or not cast it, but let me view it as JavaScript so it doesn't give me such all these like error messages that weren't errors at all. I just added search true. So I had pagination true, I had sort true, I added search true. So now my GridJS data table will be searchable. Okay. And then the last thing, back to routes. Where are my routes? I've added another route, which is an API route. So I went to result dict, which is the one, the sort of select star. I am looping through my list and popping out the SQLAlchemy one. So I don't want that. And then I am just getting JSON and returning it. This is going to be an API. There's no HTML here. There's no render. There's no HTML. It is just going to a route and dumping out JSON. And that's what APIs do. So this is, if you had your database but you wanted to give some others access to some of your data, then you might make an API available. So you want to give them your JSON, but you don't want to give them access to your database. So you sort of spit out the data in this JSON format. You don't want it to be encumbered with any HTML that they have to separate out. So you just make it sort of pure JSON. Okay, so let's run the routes. And then I updated the layouts to add, I added the new route. So I have, this is the table. This is just pure HTML table. So just pure HTML table, and I have two of them, just working through the data in different ways. Here is the data table, which is mostly the same, except that the layout, we've added the data table and the jQuery CDNs, the GridJS, and again, I added in the search ability, so I can say down here, then I want planets and have a P in them, which is Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto. And if I go to PL, then it's just Pluto. So I added that search property. And this, if I look behind the scenes, is mostly JavaScript rather than HTML. So it's that sort of newer sort of newer version of sort of JavaScript libraries. You don't have as much, you're not applying your JavaScript to a lot of HTML. You are having the JavaScript create the HTML. And most of that is all hidden up in these CDNs. And what we're responsible for is preparing the data that will be in the table. So that's what we've done. Okay, and that's all old stuff. And now finally the new thing, the API. And that just gives me the JSON. So I have start with a square bracket, so that's a list. And then I have dictionaries for each of the planets in there. And that's all you want for an API. And there's no back button here because it's not HTML. I can use the browser's back button, but I can't have a navigation. A navigation is an HTML thing. My style is an HTML thing, whereas the API is just pure data. Just dump JSON, end of story. So that's all it is. So I don't view I don't view the page source. This is the page source. This is what there is, and there is no more. Okay, well, that's what I wanted to show you on this one. Playing around with some queries, naming the fields versus not naming the fields, getting objects or getting tuples, and making dictionaries out of it in either direction. And then playing around with how that might affect our data tables. And then finally adding an API route where we had no tables, no HTML whatsoever, just dumping JSON. Okay, thanks for your attention.